Hello and welcome, my amazing listeners. Today's shout out goes to my incredible audience tuning from DR Congo, Botswana, and South India. Thank you so much for all the love and support. Nzinga has always lived in the shadows, sacrificing everything for her family, especially for her sister Lola. But when the one she loves is taken from her, Nzinga realizes that the loyalty has a cost. Now, she's forced to ask, will she always be just a pillar for others, or will she finally find her own light? Nzinga Kankonde was only 6 years old when she first learned what it meant to sacrifice for family. She was sitting on the steps of their small home, her legs too short to touch the ground, swinging them as she watched her mother prepare breakfast in the kitchen. Nzinga was a quiet child with big, watchful eyes that absorbed everything around her. She loved mornings because she could watch her mother, Mwela, hum softly as she worked. Nzinga admired her mother's strength, the way she moved with purpose, a woman carrying all her family's dreams and struggles on her back. Nzinga, fetch the firewood, Mwela called out, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. Nzinga quickly obeyed, eager to please. As she returned, she saw her younger sister Lola already dressed in a new, brightly colored dress. It was more beautiful than any Nzinga had ever worn. Vibrant patterns in shades of red and gold that made her sister look like royalty. Lola spun around, giggling, her laughter ringing like bells in the morning air. Mwela turned and smiled, her face softening as she looked at Lola. "Ah, you look so beautiful, Mwana Mwasi," she said, using the affectionate term for daughter. "You are like the morning sun, bright and full of promise." Nzinga stood in the background, the firewood bundles heavy in her arms, feeling its weight pressing it against her chest. She wanted to ask why she didn't have a dress like Lola's, but before she could speak, Mwela's eyes turned toward her. "And you, Nzinga," Mwela said, her tone shifting from warmth to expectation. "You must take care of your sister. As the elder, you must learn that family comes first. To carry a burden for those we love is to be strong." Nzinga nodded, absorbing her mother's words with the reverence of a child. She did not fully understand the depth of those words, but she felt the pride in them, the weight of a role she had been given. To carry a burden for those we love is to be strong. Nzinga grew up carrying that mantra in her heart. At 9, when Lola broke their mother's prize clay bowl while playing, it was Nzinga who took the blame, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "You are the older one. You should know better." "But Mama, I didn't..." Nzinga started to protest, but Mwela cut her off. "A true elder does not speak of who is wrong or right, Nzinga. She carries her family's burdens quietly, like the river that holds secrets beneath its surface." Nzinga nodded, swallowing her frustration. She looked over at Lola, who flashed her a guilty but grateful smile, before hiding behind their mother's skirt. Lola always had a way of escaping blame, her charm and innocence creating a shield Nzinga could not penetrate. Yet Nzinga accepted it, allowing herself to take the scoldings, each one a silent sacrifice. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Mwela shared a proverb her mother had once told her. "The strong tree shelters the weak, but it is the strong tree that grows weary under the weight." She looked directly at Nzinga as she spoke, pride and expectation glimmering in her eyes. Nzinga felt a warmth at her mother's gaze, a fleeting moment of approval that filled her with resolve. She would be that tree for her sister, no matter the cost. But that night, as she lay awake, a thought came to her unbidden. Who would be a tree for me? By the time Nzinga and Lola reached their teenage years, Mwela's favoritism had become more pronounced. Lola was praised for her beauty and charm, often introduced proudly by Mwela to guests as the jewel of the family. Meanwhile, Nzinga was the responsible one, the pillar, as Mwela put it, upon whom the family relied. Their father had passed away when Nzinga was 14, and she felt the responsibility of his absence settle on her shoulders. Mwela would often remind her, Nzinga, your father left us, but you must be the one to keep this family strong. Remember, Mwana Mwasi, a river does not run backward, nor does it complain about its course. This silent burden of loyalty became heavier over the years, especially as Lola's popularity grew. She blossomed into a young woman who could light up any room with her smile, capturing the attention of boys and girls alike. Nzinga loved her sister deeply, but there were days when the weight of her sacrifices left a bitter taste in her mouth. One afternoon, Lola came rushing into Nzinga's room, her face flushed with excitement. Nzinga, there's a dance tonight and I don't have anything newer to wear. Can I borrow your blue dress? Nzinga looked at her sister, hesitating. The blue dress was her favorite, a rare gift from their grandmother, but Lola's pleading eyes and eager smile dissolved her resistance. All right, Lola, Nzinga sighed, handing her the dress. Just be careful with it, okay? Lola squealed, hugging Nzinga before twirling out of the room. Watching her go, Nzinga felt a strange emptiness settle in her chest. Each time she gave something to Lola, it felt like she was giving away a piece of herself, but she reminded herself of her mother's words, family comes first. When Nzinga turned 24, she finally felt like her life was taking shape. She had secured a steady job and was quietly building a future for herself. She was even in a relationship with Kabelo, a gentle, thoughtful man who made her feel seen and valued. One evening, as Nzinga and Kabelo walked along the bustling streets of Kinshasa, Nzinga found herself confiding in him. I sometimes feel invisible, like a shadow next to my sister. Kabelo stopped, taking her hands in his. Nzinga, you are more than a shadow. You are the light that others don't always see, but I do. His words warmed her heart, filling her with a quiet confidence she hadn't known before. But trouble was already brewing. When Nzinga invited Kabelo to meet her family, she noticed Lola's eyes light up with a curious glint as she was introduced to him. Nzinga brushed it off as her sister's friendly nature, though a small part of her felt uneasy. Lola seemed especially charming that evening, laughing loudly at Kabelo's jokes, brushing her hand against his arm. Nzinga tried to ignore it, reminding herself that her sister was simply outgoing, but a doubt lingered in her heart, a seed of fear she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. For the first time, she wondered about the limits of her loyalty. Weeks went by, and Lola's interest in Kabelo became more apparent. One evening, Nzinga returned home earlier than usual to find Kabelo and Lola laughing together on the porch, her hand resting on Kabelo's arm in a way that felt too familiar. Nzinga forced a smile, hiding the unease in her chest. Kabelo, I didn't know you were here so early. Oh, Lola just happened to be around and we were talking, Kabelo said, oblivious to Nzinga's discomfort. Lola flashed Nzinga an innocent smile, but the glint in her eyes told a different story. That evening, Nzinga lay awake, her mother's words echoing in her mind. To carry a burden for those we love is to be strong. But was she strong or merely blind? As the weeks passed, Lola's behavior grew more flirtatious, and Kabelo's attention seemed to drift. Nzinga tried to ignore it, but the truth was hard to deny. One afternoon, she found Lola and Kabelo talking in low voices in the garden, Lola's hand on his shoulder. Nzinga's heart clenched, but she said nothing. Finally, one evening, as the family gathered, Lola stood up, glancing at Nzinga with an almost defiant smile. Nzinga, Cabello, and I have decided to be together, she announced, her voice carrying an edge Nzinga had never heard before. Nzinga's world spun, her vision blurring as she tried to process Lola's words. She looked at Cabello, hoping for an explanation, a denial, anything that would make sense. But he avoided her gaze, guilt written on his face. Lola shrugged, her voice almost dismissive. Nzinga, it's not my fault if Cabello realized he preferred me. Perhaps you should have been more attentive. Mwela, who had overheard the conversation, approached Nzinga, her voice stern. Nzinga, a true elder sister would understand that sometimes sacrifices must be made for the happiness of the family. It is your duty to be strong. Mwana Mwasi, you are our pillar. Nzinga's heart shattered, the weight of her mother's words settling heavily upon her. She looked from her mother to Lola, who smirked as though she had won a battle. She had spent a lifetime sacrificing for her sister, believing it was her duty, believing it would make her loved. But at that moment, Nzinga realized the painful truth. Her loyalty had only served as a shield for Lola's ambition. Without a word, Nzinga turned and walked out of the house. She needed to breathe, to escape, to find the strength to break free from the chains that had bound her all her life. Nzinga left her family home without a clear destination, her thoughts a tangled web of heartbreak and anger. She walked through the crowded streets of Kinshasa, letting the familiar noise and chaos drown out her pain. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, but Nzinga felt only a chill inside. She spent that night at a friend's house, replaying the betrayals in her mind. How many times had she ignored the signs? How often had she silenced her own needs to protect her sister? The realization weighed heavily on her. She knew she could no longer return to her old life, to the shadows. In the morning, Nzinga made a decision. She would start fresh, away from the home where she had given so much of herself. She rented a modest apartment in a quieter part of the city, surrounded by artists, musicians, and vendors. It was a neighborhood full of life and creativity, a world Nzinga had only admired from afar. That first night in her new place, Nzinga felt a strange sense of freedom. She stood on her small balcony, watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time, there was no one to sacrifice for, no expectations hanging over her. She was just Nzinga. But as she looked out over the city, she felt a pang of loneliness. She had always been the pillar, but now she felt adrift. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. A river does not run backward, nor does it complain about its course. Nzinga took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "If I am a river, then I will find my own way forward." Days turned into weeks, and Nzinga began to build a life of her own. She found a job in a small art supply shop owned by Madame Bintu, a friendly and wise woman who noticed Nzinga's quiet strength. One day, as Nzinga was arranging the paint jars on the shelves, Madame Bintu approached her with a knowing smile. "Nzinga, I see a light in your eyes that you don't let shine. Why do you hide your gifts?" Nzinga hesitated, unsure what to say. I don't know if I have any gifts, madame." Madame Bintu chuckled, shaking her head. "Every heart has its own color, Nzinga. Yours is hidden beneath sadness, but I know it is there." She handed Nzinga a sketchbook. "Draw, paint, express yourself. Sometimes we must uncover the colors within us to see the beauty of life." Inspired by Madame Bintu's encouragement, Nzinga began to sketch in her spare time. She poured her emotions onto the pages, drawing scenes from her childhood, her family, and her pain. Each line, each color felt like a step toward healing. One evening, Madame Bintu introduced Nzinga to Ikoko Yombo, a local artist who was well-known for his bold and expressive works. Ikoko was a tall, quiet man with a mysterious air about him, his eyes sharp and observant. He noticed Nzinga's sketches lying on the counter and raised an eyebrow. "Interesting work," he said, studying one of her drawings of a river running through a forest, its waters filled with hidden faces. "There is a lot of emotion in these lines." Nzinga felt herself blush, uncertain of how to respond. "It's just something I do to clear my mind," she replied softly. Ikoko nodded, a small smile on his face. "The soul doesn't lie, Nzinga. You have a gift. If you ever want to explore it further, my studio is nearby. We hold open sessions for artists to share and create." Nzinga felt a spark of excitement and fear. The idea of sharing her work, of stepping out of her comfort zone, was daunting. But she remembered Madame Bintu's words, "Every heart has its own color," and decided to take a chance. The following week, Nzinga attended her first open session at Ikoko's studio. The room was alive with color and energy, filled with artists painting, sculpting, and sketching. Nzinga felt both exhilarated and out of place, but Ikoko welcomed her with a gentle smile and handed her a blank canvas. "Paint something that speaks to you," he said simply. Nzinga took a deep breath and began to paint, letting her emotions guide her. She painted a dark forest with shafts of light breaking through the trees, symbolizing her journey from darkness into freedom. As she painted, she felt a release, as though each brushstroke was lifting a weight from her heart. When she finished, Ikoko stood beside her, nodding with approval. "You've captured something powerful, Nzinga. Darkness and light, struggle and resilience. This is not just a painting, it's a part of you." For the first time, Nzinga felt a sense of pride in her own work. The other artists in the studio gathered around, admiring her piece and congratulating her. She felt seen in a way she never had before, not as Lola's sister, not as the dutiful daughter, but as herself. Ikoko began mentoring Nzinga, encouraging her to explore new techniques and styles. Through their conversations, Nzinga learned that Ikoko had his own story of betrayal and loss. His art was his way of healing, of transforming his pain into something beautiful. They spent hours talking, painting, and challenging each other, and a bond began to form between them. One evening, as they sat together cleaning their brushes, Ikoko looked at Nzinga thoughtfully. "You know, Nzinga, there's an old saying, 'The bird with broken wings finds its voice in song.' You have found your voice through your art." Nzinga felt her heart swell with gratitude and something else, a warmth that she hadn't felt in a long time. In Ikoko, she found a kindred spirit, someone who understood her journey and her struggles. She was beginning to find herself piece by piece. Thank you for joining Nzinga on this emotional journey of sacrifice and self-discovery. If you're as captivated by her story as we are, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Part 2 is just around the corner, where Nzinga faces new challenges, confronts her family, and steps fully into her own power. You won't want to miss what happens next.